whether it's visiting with different law enforcement that I visited with earlier this morning when I came in, or visiting with Guthrie PD, I hear from the frustration that these are folks that get up literally every single day to be able to serve people. They get up every day, they hug their families, they hug their kids, they put on a uniform and a badge, and they take off to go serve the public. These are not folks out to go hurt the public. They're there because they literally want to be able to serve people every day. And it's the frustration that they feel to be able to actually serve, and they want to just engage with people, and suddenly they feel like they're the enemy, and they're not the enemy. They're our greatest ally in the community. So there's some breakdown in just the community relationships that are happening in some places, and that's being transferred to people all over it. Probably the most powerful story that I can hear from my conversation today was just the simple reality that what happened in Dallas was a group of individuals went to protest the police, and they had police protection there, and then people started firing on and shooting the police, and while everyone else was running away, the police were still running in to be able to protect not only the protesters but each other. So in the most ironic of ways, during a protest about police were providing the security, police had the greatest pain on it, and police were still ultimately protecting the public all the way to the end. That's what they do all the time. And so it's just a very powerful thing for them to be able to serve that way.
When did you first hear the news, and what was your reaction?
So late last night with everyone else when I first heard the news, and stayed up very, very late last night tracking it blow by blow as it was coming in last evening. So when I first started picking up, some of it was the spontaneous protests that were rising up around the country from different places, from the Black Lives Matter protests in multiple cities. When those are peaceful and they're out there, those are individuals just expressing their idea. They're also dealing with pain. Some of those families that have been affected, whatever the reason may be, they deal with pain and they deal with struggle as well. My issue is we need to be able to resolve any kind of issues or differences in a peaceful way, which we've always done and can do as a nation. Creating greater divides takes us exactly the wrong direction. Especially for law enforcement that spends so much of their time trying to protect the public and trying to engage. So where there's a disconnect between law enforcement and the community, it is both the responsibility of law enforcement and the community to be able to engage with each other and to be able to resolve that, and that can easily be done, especially with people that they want to be able to serve each other and want to be able to serve the community. That shouldn't be hard. The frustration that I had with the initial spontaneous reaction that was happening around the country were some assumptions that were being made of areas we don't know yet. There was an immediate assumption that there was a white police officer that had shot a black individual, and so it immediately was racism that was put on. We don't know any of the facts at this point. And from law enforcement that I talk to over and over again and have for a very long time, they will tell you they do not want a bad cop out on the street because it tarnishes their reputation as well. So they are the first to be able to push out individuals that are in the wrong. But the assumption immediately that when someone is shot, it immediately is race-based is an incorrect assumption, because the vast majority of police officers are great folks that are serving people over and over again. So my immediate thought on it when I saw what happened, and not only the protests rising up after what happened in Louisiana and in Minnesota, is that we're too quickly rushing to judgment to determine this is what the reason has to be, rather than getting all the facts out. It's what we've seen in other cases where there's an immediate assumption that there's some racial motivation. Then once they do the full research and they do the full investigation, local, state, and federal investigations, they turn around later and find out, no, this really wasn't race-based at all. So I hate for us to rush to judgment on any of these in any way. There's no substitute for obviously the family, and I think that's one of the things that came out last night in some of the reporting, which I was grateful that it did, is that these police officers are not police officers, they're family members, they're members of our churches and of our communities, they're neighbors, they live among us, they have kids. These are families that are involved. And one of the first pictures that I had last night when the news came out was there an awful lot of husbands or wives and kids that hugged that person that went off to work and assumed they were coming home that night, and they're not coming home that night. Because someone randomly decided they were going to shoot a cop that they don't know the family, don't know anything else about them. So my frustration is first for what's happening in the community and that type of violence and engagement, and second, overwhelming grief for both those that are in the hospital right now, but for all those families that have lost loved ones for absolutely no reason. There's continuous engagement that we need to have both on a national level, but it really happens on a community level. When law enforcement and communities engage regularly with all aspects of the community, not just one aspect, with all aspects of the communities, and keep that open conversation going among communities, so that when there are issues and when there are areas of tension, those can be resolved and worked out because there's an ongoing relationship. Everybody should want the same thing: safe neighborhoods, opportunities to be able to get a good education, to be able to get a job, to be able to travel safely. Those are all common values that we have as a country, and that's what law enforcement stands for. They are the authority that's in the middle of our community that makes sure that everyone has an equal opportunity, that everyone has a safe environment. And so where that breaks down, you can continue to talk about that. So one of the things that I would encourage us to do nationally is not just talk about race issues, but talk about community issues and talk about family issues. As our families collapse, it makes it harder and harder for teachers, makes it harder and harder for law enforcement. So the biggest issues that we face first as a nation is really a family issue and the collapse of the family. The second issue is a breakdown in authority that's happening around the country, and that is now demonstrated even what's happening in law enforcement in multiple areas. So when we break down authority and we break down our family issues, it makes it much tougher in every area. That's not something government fixes. Government can't fix the family. Government can't fix a breakdown in authority, but we can certainly set the tone and the example for the right way to be able to resolve issues. I think the nation's in a state of frustration right now, quite frankly, and disappointment. I think there are a lot of people that thought things would be different now in the nation in some ways, and they're very frustrated where things are. We see that not only in elections, we see that not only in the breakdown of some of our communities, but primarily we're seeing that in the example of the family. When the family breaks down, communities break down. About 48 hours ago, my office, along with 6 other offices in the Senate, sent a letter to Secretary of State Kerry and asked him specifically to relook again at the security clearances. Jim Comey mentioned very specifically that though he wasn't bringing criminal charges and wasn't going to encourage that to happen for the prosecution, and people can agree or disagree with that, I strongly disagree with that. But he did mention at that anyone who had this kind of carelessness with information would have other consequences. Those consequences are almost always a loss of security clearance and typically the loss of your government job and any other contracting you may be. Any person in national defense, any person in the intelligence community, any person that's a government contractor, if they deal with classified information and they took any of that classified information home with them, as Hillary Clinton did, took it to her home server, they would lose their security clearance. So myself and 6 other senators sent a letter to Secretary Kerry, asked him to be able to reopen the issue on security clearances, and said you should abide by State Department policy, and that is these individuals that got their clearance through the State Department should lose their clearance because of this evidence. Yesterday then, Secretary Kerry did agree, reopen the investigation to start looking at security clearance, which is the right thing to do. Every other professional would lose their security clearance based on this activity. We should have the same standard no matter what your last name is, no matter what your position is. You can't say that you're a junior officer somewhere in the military and so you lose your credentials, but someone much more senior to you would lose it. Basic rule of law applies to every person. So I'm glad that Secretary Kerry reopened that. That was our request to him specifically by letter, and I'm glad he responded quickly in that process, and we'll see if he can get that complete. But it's the right thing to do, and it's typical protocol with the State Department. I'm going to the convention in Cleveland, and I've said from the very beginning that I'm going to endorse whoever the Republican nominee is. There are a lot of people that are battling back and forth on personalities. I have to look at policy. At the end of the day, what are the policies of one person and what are the policies of the other person? And while Donald Trump and I don't agree a lot on personality and the way that he carries some of the issues and talks about some of the things, we agree on multiple different policy areas. And so when I look at policies side by side, that's the decision that I have to make about where we're going as the future of the country.